Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. I don't exactly know how to start this video. It's one of the more complicated and important topics that I have ever written about, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first of which is that this video is going to touch on a ton of lore from across all of Destiny's 10 years, and there's also the note that Destiny's story has been written across 10 years by various people, with various intentions and with various narrative changes within the universe, its characters, or its concepts. That makes talking about this topic one hell of a rabbit hole, and the comprehension of a topic like this is something that I needed a bit more help with than just my typical memory, and so I needed to do some more research. That said, there was another content creator who beat me to it, and I'm glad they did. They made a rather incredible breakdown regarding this particular topic, the Winnower and the Unveiling Lore book, and they deserve a lot of praise for this. That creator is someone I've mentioned a few times, and their name is Winnower. I'm going to link their video on the subject below, because I think it's really important if you want to understand this. Some of the ideas I am discussing here today are ideas that I can only really discuss with the degree of clarity that I have now because of Winnower's work. It would be weird for me to not talk about his video when he is basically also touching on the exact same topics that I'm touching on here. So yeah, it may be an over 1 hour long video from Winnower, but trust me, it breaks down all of the crucial details about the lore and the nature of its creation. Whilst a lot of what I'm discussing today is retreading that same ground, I would encourage you to head to Winnower's video and give it a watch as well. I found it really useful, it improved my clarity on the topic, gave me some interesting ideas, and taught me things I didn't know, so I'm sure it will do the same for you. With that said, today we're going to be talking about Destiny's primary creation myth and the controversy surrounding its main source, and who or what its two main characters, the Winnower and the Gardener, really are, as well as whether one of them, the Winnower, actually exists. But first, let's talk for just a second about sleep. A few years ago, I was a little mad at some of you guys because I kept seeing comments in my videos stating that you were all falling asleep to them. And then I realized I shouldn't be mad at all because I noticed the first few words at the starts of those comments. Thank you. Yeah, it turns out that a bunch of you guys have trouble sleeping and that you've been using my videos to help put you to sleep and give you a decent night's rest. And you know what? As someone who has struggled badly with insomnia in the past, more power to you. Sleep matters, and if I can help, who am I to complain? So that's why I'm really excited to bring you what might be an unusual partnership, but definitely one that'll help. Advanced GG. Now, I know, normally, when I talk about them, it's about their caffeine gaming formula, which helps your focus and improves your ability to react in video games. Today, it's a little different, because I spoke to them, and as it turns out, they're branching out and making something completely different. A sleep formula that helps to improve your rest. Once again, Advanced GG took their time and did their research, and as a result, you won't find anything like melatonin in this formula, no hormone-altering traits to this whatsoever. And that's good because it means you aren't messing with your natural sleep hormones, you're helping set yourself up for a proper good night's sleep. And if you take too much melatonin, it'll actually screw with your ability to get restful sleep, so you don't want sleep aids with melatonin in them. That's just another reason to love Advanced GG. When I said they did their homework, I meant it. They aren't screwing around when it comes to any of their products, and they weren't going to take a different attitude when it came to their sleep formula. Also, it's vegan-friendly, low-carb, and has a great taste, like a nice little hibiscus tea before bed. So if you are one of those people that's struggling with sleep or just want to get a better way to relax and wind down from a stressful day, look no further. Check out Advanced GG's new sleep formula. And thanks again to Advanced GG for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to the lore, and strap in by the way, this'll be a long one, grab a popcorn bucket. Let's start at the very beginning. Destiny is a universe built originally around the concepts of light and dark being opposed forces. Destiny has also made the central ideas of light and darkness incredibly obscure over time. Diving into the ideas of the light and the dark and what they truly are feels like a rabbit hole without end, and it's been that way since Destiny 1. And a lot of that is deliberate. There are some questions that are so big that they deserved a real crowning moment like Final Shape to answer. However, we have had major sources of information about these primal forces within the universe before, and the greatest source of information that's been debated ever since the release of Lightfall and certain developer interviews has to be a lore book that is simply titled Unveiling. So, how did we get Unveiling? Well, this comes from back in Shadowkeep. You remember that artifact from the final mission? The one that we made contact with, which then transported us to a vision where we talked to a clone of ourselves inside the Black Garden? The one that Eris mentions in the opening of the Garden of Salvation raid. Well, it all comes from this artifact. After we completed the Garden of Salvation raid, it would start to send us secondary communications every week. These communications were recorded by Eris, who at the time was urging us to be aware that these comms were not to distract us from the truth. Now, this lore book was clearly written with us in mind. It addressed us, but it speaks to us from the perspective of a character known as the Winnower. It recounts the story of how the universe and life began, and thus represents Destiny's only known true creation myth if it turns out to be true. Here's the thing. From the very beginning, even as Eris told us not to trust its contents, it was clear that this was also something that was written from someone's perspective, and therefore it has an agenda. It is made with their perspective in mind, and so its contents always have to be looked at with a pinch of salt. But what's actually said inside this lore book? Well, it doesn't just feature the Winnower, it also features his counterpart, the Gardener. The two of them existed in a garden long before time. In that garden, they played a game of possibilities that is referred to as the flower game. For anyone who knows, yes, it is the same as that one flower game that has repeated patterns that you can indeed find in real life as well. This game formed incredible, intricate patterns that dictated the way that nature and all things would flow. But within this game, there was a single dominant pattern that would always emerge. This supposedly bored the Gardener, and led them to demand that there should be a new rule within the game, which allowed for new life to grow and experiment so that other patterns had a chance to become victorious. The Winnower, which desired order and structure, believed that the game was perfect as it was, and disagreed with the Gardener. According to the Winnower, the Gardener's insistence on a change of rules led to a great conflict in the garden, which in itself spawned the universe, began time, and set the stage for the next very real iteration of the flower game, one which still plays out to this day and can be explained by that really simple concept of sword logic if you are the Winnower. In short, the winners in this game will be strong, because only strong life continues to exist. Weak life is snuffed out. Sword logic also assumes that as things get stronger, they inevitably will make the competition of life harder and harder until a single dominant pattern emerges, just like was the case in the flower game. This entire lore book is essentially an entity trying to convince us of its point of view, with it even going as far as to address us directly multiple times throughout the book. So, with that in mind, we have an entity that is supposedly ancient, not necessarily trustworthy, and it's addressing us with some stuff about what supposedly was the creation mythology of the entire universe. So, what's the controversy? Well, especially after the release of the Arsa cutscene in Season of the Deep, there's been a lot of people questioning whether this lore book was originally somewhat valid or whether it was always just a bunch of propaganda cooked up by the Witness. There's also the question of whether the Arsa cutscene is essentially retconning this lore book, thus potentially invalidating the entire thing. So this raises a pair of short questions. Is the Winnower the Witness? And does the Winnower actually exist? These two questions are going up on the conspiracy board. Yep, that one. Time to roll it out again, Martin. And they're staying there for the whole video because, well, it's all about answering these two simple questions and addressing these ideas. Before we do answer them though, I need to preface this really quickly. Normally, I like to see my lore videos created in a manner that gives you an idea of what the future might be. It's something where I like to have all the facts in place, and I like to think that it's going to lead you to the future conclusions of what will happen in Destiny. They're a teaser for the turning of the page. I'm going to ask you to not take this video in that same manner. Normally, if we take a really simple idea in the lore like the Fall of Tora Bartle, It's clear that a writer has been given or come up with a plot thread that leads succinctly from question to answer or from start to finish. These questions about the Winnower and Unveiling are not like that. They stretch across the whole 10-year saga. They have had multiple writers who've approached them and addressed the questions and potentially changed the direction of the subject multiple times. It could be that that's not the case and that there has been one consistent direction, but this is so important and there are a few conflicting elements to it, which make me realize that that may not well be the case. Again, Vinextrin has an excellent portion of his video where he discusses this. The stuff from Destiny 1 that we see in the lore though, yeah, if we're looking with that idea of changing directions and multiple writers in mind, it might not necessarily be valid in the final shape, and the context in which we initially received it might necessarily have been changed or altered, or might simply have further context that is added from retroactive continuity. So yeah, complex ideas are being presented here. They might still lend us the key to the future of Destiny's story and the answers of final shape, but also, there is a lot of complicated stuff here, so it might well not. And with that in mind, I need to tell you all, for once, despite the potential relevance this video has to the story of Final Shape, disregard it in a certain sense. I need you all to understand this video doesn't promise narrative insights like my normal ones do. In this instance, I am going to discuss these ideas, but I want to let you know that we should allow the lore of the Final Shape to be something of its own, because these ideas might not have stood the test of time, or may have been shepherded to their original intended endpoints long ago. And with that said, I have to bring up this quote from Robert Brooks, from way back when, a quote which talks about the nature of the witness and the lore in the Unveiling book. This quote has done the rounds a whole bunch, but for those of you who haven't heard it, here it is. Welcome to the problem that all Bible scholars have trying to figure out what may or may not have happened, and lining that up to actual historical events. Unveiling is a parable. It is effectively a religious text, and how much of that is propaganda, how much of that is myth, how much of that is fact is deeply unclear in the nature of the text. Players believed it, brackets Unveiling, to be 100% fact. There was a literal garden, there was a literal gardener, there was a literal winnower. And now it's starting to become clear that those may not actually be just concrete ideas, but metaphors or things that are far less concrete and clear. And as we get closer into the Final Shape, more answers on that will start coming up. And the Final Shape, of course, will have a lot of answers about the nature of those conflicts. The contradictory nature has always kind of been intentional. Whatever the witness says, maybe don't trust it. The quote in itself, as far as the deepest parts of the lore community are concerned, has become a little infamous because it's been seen by some people as the diffusing of the entire question of whether the Winnower is real or not. Most people have seen this quote and have stated that the whole of the Unveiling Lore book must therefore be lies and that it comes from the witness and therefore the witness is real but the Winnower is not. And here's the thing. Robert Brooks doesn't call the lore book lies. He states that what is and what isn't real within Unveiling is deeply unclear by the nature of the text. And to be honest, my position has always been that, yeah, we can't trust everything we read in Unveiling because, I mean, the book was written for us. It was written with an agenda in mind. It was always propaganda. It was always trying to convince us. But the question remains, whose propaganda? Yes, it came from the same relic as the initial communication from our sinister shadowed clone, and yes, that communication, based on its pronoun usage and on the use of the word salvation over and over again, likely came from the witness. But everything that follows on in Unveiling feels dramatically different from that first vision, as I'll point out later. Unveiling was clearly never going to be 100% fact, but the book itself clearly does contain some fact, as I'll show you later in this video. Those simple ideas being facts to the point that we can reach out and touch them or even visit them in-game tells me that there is at least a kernel of truth hidden in these pages that we see in Unveiling. Even if that truth is masquerading as more than it actually is, it is still there. And after all, what is a parable? A story which is told to us with the intent of conveying a message rather than a completely accurate historical revision of an event that happened. The bedrock message of the truth within it is what's important, not the specifics or the minutiae. With all that said, the possibilities here are far too tantalizing not to discuss, and they give us remarkable insights into the nature of the light, the darkness, and potentially the primordial beings that are here at the heart of Destiny's story. So yes, I will say again, give Final Shape the room in your mind to tell its own story, but do also know that whilst normally my videos would give you insight, this one might not be the same. Be ready to disregard these findings if they turn out not to be true, and be ready to look further into them again if it turns out that they are still relevant. This is the freedom I want to give the writers at Bungie because they deserve the ability to tell their own story in the Final Shape, and as long as it's a good story, I think that the rest is kind of a moot point. I'll talk more about that closer to the end, but for now we need to jump in and actually start analyzing. So let's go back to our two big questions, and let's start with the first of them. Is the Winnower the witness? After looking through a bunch of evidence, I think I can pretty safely say that the answer is no. Now, let me go ahead and talk about one major counterpoint at the very beginning, which I've sort of already mentioned, which was simply the fact that when we initially touched the artifact at the end of Shadowkeep, it was probably the witness that spoke to us. But then afterwards, the artifact seemed to reveal Unveiling, and that supposedly is from the perspective of the Winnower, which is not necessarily the witness. But it's the same artifact, and we recovered both from a Black Fleet vessel. Now that is certainly true, but hear me out for a second. We don't know what this artifact does, and if it is merely a conduit for communications of some sort, as we continuously see messages being sent through it and even signals being bounced through it, then it's entirely possible that it is not purely in the control of the witness. It is possible that there is something else going on with it. Now again, it comes to us from a Black Fleet vessel, so there is a major hole potentially in this from the beginning. But I still don't think the witness and the Winnower are the same character. And after looking through a bunch of evidence, I think we can point to three major reasons for this. The first is the use of different pronouns in the dialogue. The second is the differing philosophies of the Winnower and the witness. And the third is the differing way in which those philosophies are either presented or not. So let's start with point one, which is pronouns. To put it really simply, the witness always has pronouns of we and it applied to it. So take a listen to some clips where that happens.
We have seen and we know pain.
That use of we isn't surprising considering what the witness is. It's a compound being of many other beings. A being that was created from many different precursors that sacrificed themselves in the Great Penitent Merging. Looking to the Noesis portion of the Final Shape Collector's Edition lore tells us that maybe the witness has also absorbed and subsumed other species that it encountered within the void of space, so potentially within the witness there are multitudes of beings. But let's go ahead and take a look back to Unveiling really quickly. Unveiling is different because the narrator in Unveiling uses a singular pronoun, not we, but I or me. For example, the first entry in Unveiling says, "Imagine a world without me." That is the final line. It is an ending to it, and it is definitive. When describing the conflict that arose in the garden, later in Unveiling, the narrator states in the first knife entry that, "I looked at the gardener, I looked at my hands, I discovered the first knife." So the witness is using plural pronouns, but the narrator in the Unveiling book, who we might assume to be the Winnower, uses singular pronouns. The next big difference between the witness and the supposed Winnower in Unveiling, according to the lore, is their actual philosophies. In short, what they view as the final shape, much like a ton of other times, isn't actually the same thing. The narrator of Unveiling believes in the concept of cutting the weak away from the strong, like chaff from grain. This means that the universe doesn't allow unnecessary suffering to exist because strong life is always evolving to reach the top, and anything that is too weak is cut short before it can suffer unnecessarily. If something doesn't continuously sharpen itself and improve, it will not survive. The law that it prescribes to is written naturally into the fabric of the universe itself, or at least the Winnower would have us believe, if it exists. The Witness believes in something very different to this. It's different in a somewhat subtle way, though. Yes, it does believe that there is a finality to the universe, hence the name Final Shape. It believes that there is a conception of the final shape that will also bring about an end to suffering in the universe. But the key difference here is that Unveiling presents death and continual change through growth as an important part of this process, and The Witness does not. It believes that all things should reach a single, final perfection as dictated by it, and that things should stay that way forever. It believes that it should be able to dictate the pattern of the universe so that all the universe should be perfect. Its pattern is static, not fluid. Imaru actually sums this up pretty well in The Season of the Witch, when describing the final shape of the hive as the sword logic, which is really similar to the one described in Unveiling by the Winnower, versus the final shape of the Witness. Take a listen to this. I think it is actually the most succinct way to explain the difference in philosophy.
The final shape, the way we think about it, it's the winner. The one who's so smart or strong that they beat everybody else. The final shape may not be the most interesting or best looking or whatever, but it's the one who makes it to the finish line again and again. It's the best at what it does. The Witness's final shape isn't like that. It's just flat. It's static. It's a forced ending, like winning a game by turning it off. Forever. Ugh. It gives me the heebie-jeebies.
So the hive's conception of the final shape is closer to that noted by the Winnower. The Witness's final shape is not the same. As Imaru said, it's like turning a game off. So these philosophies are different, and on that note, where did the hive get their ideas of the final shape from anyway? Hold on to that thought, we'll circle back to it. Spoiler alert, it's found in the Books of Sorrow and it concerns Oryx. For now though, it'd be prudent to point out that there is another major break in the philosophy between the Witness and the supposed Winnower that is also shown off in Unveiling, which is that Unveiling actually explains a whole bunch of the supposed agenda of the Winnower. Meanwhile, the Witness has refused to elaborate on its plans, even to its disciples. And how do we know that? Well, the Inspiral Lore book. In particular, the entry of the Unknown Disciple, where it asks why the Witness allows so many different conceptions of the final shape to exist within its own ranks. This Unknown Disciple states that Rolk's nihilism, Savathun's sword logic, and Nezarek's gambit of pain are all supposedly a part of the final shape, and that yet they are presented in such utterly different ideas that all seem contradictory. The Witness has never elaborated on the nature of the final shape to any of its disciples. We learned of what the Witness believes the final shape to be thanks only to Arsa and the Entelechy Collector's Edition lorebook, which required Ido jumping around the system for months trying to gather all the information. So yeah, the Witness is hiding its philosophy. It doesn't tell anybody, it doesn't explain. Meanwhile, the Winnower supposedly wrote Unveiling, and even if it is a parable or propaganda or simply an attempt to sway us, the philosophy it states within is clearly written to serve and present that perspective. So even if the garden at the start of all time is a lie, what the Winnower wants us to see isn't. It is trying to convince us of its version of the final shape. A version that requires the constant pressure of death and killing in order to cut away the weak from the strong and ensure that strong life thrives. Venextran makes a great point in his video by asking this. If the Witness wrote Unveiling and is the same as the Winnower, why tell us about the supposed final shape and not tell any of its disciples? This is completely at the heart of the truth. The philosophies here don't add up and they don't make sense. And again, I'm going to retread Venextran's points here too. This could have been simply to corrupt us to the side of darkness, but then other Guardians fell to darkness because they were gifted with dark powers. So why bother sending us a treatise, a manifesto? Why bother sending these specific messages when all it took for the Kentarch 3 to fall in the Black Garden was darkness powers and the divinity? The three of them received darkness powers, and their fall was complete from that moment. No philosophy required, no long book, no need to convince anyone. It just happened. One could argue that that's the meta point of the whole book, of just convincing us to join and then to leave the light, but then why wasn't this plotline followed up more in Beyond Light, when we were actually gifted stasis and we heard nothing to do with the corruption of our guardian? Now, sure, there were a few mentions of it from our ghost, but at the end of the day, by the point in time when we'd killed Aramis, we heard maybe one or two more peeps about it, and then it was basically taken for granted that the corruption side of things was not going to be brought up again. The overall point I'm trying to make is that the entire philosophy of the Winnower is stated out there in Unveiling in its lore. Meanwhile, the Witness seems to be really unwilling to communicate its overall vision and philosophy of the final shape to even its disciples. There are a lot of other notes that could be discussed regarding whether the Witness and the Winnower are the same, but I think these points are the clearest and most salient. And whilst it seems clear from the writing that there are enough differences between the Winnower and the Witness for them to potentially be seen as different figures, their philosophy, manners of speech, and the lore and choices regarding the player all point in two vastly different directions and to two vastly different characters. So yeah, hopefully that answers our first question. Is the Witness the same as the Winnower? And I think no, because for one, the damn pronouns are different, which means that the identity of the person speaking to us in each instance is different, and also because the philosophies are different, and also because the Witness doesn't present its philosophy, whereas the Winnower does. These are all important points that lead me to believe that no, the Winnower and the Witness are not the same being. But that leads us onto our second big question on the board. Does the Winnower actually exist, or is this all Witness-based propaganda? Well, in the lore from a long time ago, there are implications that the Winnower does exist, and they go far beyond the Unveiling Lore book itself. In particular, let's pick back up on that hive point that I talked about earlier, and let's talk about the Books of Sorrow. Now, for a little context, the Hive were lied to all along by the Witness. Sathona had heard the whispers of the worm familiar that her father had acquired, and was convinced of the nature of the Godwave being true. This much we know to be the case. However, it's worth remembering that the Books of Sorrow were recovered through the calcified fragments, and the Books of Sorrow were written from the perspective of Oryx for the vast majority of them. Only a few verses near the beginning are from different perspectives, such as those of Shiro and Teox in the first few, and sure, maybe there's an occasional Ecumene Corsair here or there, or some other weird line of code, but the vast majority of this is written from Oryx's perspective. So this lore book may be based on knowledge that is false, but we have no reason to doubt what Oryx says and recorded in this book to be sincere when it's from his point of view. Oryx has no reason to lie to us in this book. It's the perspective that matters, and the information it was all based on at the very beginning might be false, which means the first 20 or so entries miss some context. For example, there is no mention of Rolk whatsoever, but even with that in mind, a vast majority of this story still rings true. So, what's in the Books of Sorrow that pertains to the Winnower? Well, it's verses 4:1 and 4:2 that concern us. After becoming the Taken King, after defeating the Ecumene, and after conquering the people of Tai Shabeth, Oryx went deep into his throne world and prepared to commune with an entity beyond his own power. Take a listen, I'm going to read both entries. Oryx went down into his throne world. He went out into the abyss, and with each step he read one of his tablets so that they became like stones beneath his feet. He went out and he created an altar, and he prepared an unborn ogre. He called on the deep, saying, "I can see you in the sky. You are the waves which are battles, and the battles are the waves. Come into this vessel I have prepared for you." And it arrived, the deep itself. Oryx, my king, my friend. Kick back, relax, shrug off that armor, set down that blade, roll your burdened shoulders and let down your guard. This is a place of life, a place of peace. Out in the world, we ask a simple, true question. A question like, can I kill you? Can I rip your world apart? Tell me the truth, for if I don't ask, someone will ask it of me. And they call us evil. Evil. Evil means socially maladaptive. We are adaptiveness itself. Oryx, how do we explain it to them? The world is not built on the laws they love, not on friendship, but on mutual interest. Not on peace, but on victory by any means. The universe is run by extinction, by extermination, by gamma-ray bursts burning up 1,000 garden worlds, by howling singularities eating up infant suns. And if life is to live, if anything is to survive through the end of all things, it will live not by the smile, but by the sword. Not in a soft place, but in a hard hell. Not in the rotting bog of artificial paradise, but in the cold, hard, self-verifying truth of that one ultimate arbiter, the only judge, the power that is its own metric and its own source. Existence at any cost. Strip away the lies and truces and delaying tactics they call civilization, and this is what remains. This beautiful shape. The fate of everything is made like this. In the collision, the test of one praxis against another. This is how the world changes. One way meets a second way, and they discharge their weapons, they exchange their words and markets, they contest, and in doing so they petition each other for the right to go on being something instead of nothing. This is the universe figuring out what it should be in the end. And it is majestic. Majestic. It is the only thing that can be true in and of itself. And it is what I am. This passage is from the perspective of a great entity that addresses Oryx directly. This entry leaves us several important things to point out, especially when it's compared to the Witness. First of all, notice again the use of pronouns in here. They are singular. At the very end, it says, "and it is what I am." As I've said before, the Witness uses plural pronouns, meaning that it is unlikely that these two are the same beings. Secondly, listen to how the Witness speaks and compare it to the character in the Books of Sorrows that speaks to Oryx. The Witness is a matter-of-fact kind of character. The Witness is a flat and monotone creature that doesn't punctuate its speech with superfluous language to describe things. The Witness could probably say everything that could have been conveyed in that verse within the space of a few sentences, instead of a few paragraphs. You want the clearest example of this difference between the Witness and the Winnower? Well, let's go ahead and compare. When the Winnower addresses Oryx in the Books of Sorrow, it says, "Oryx, my king, my friend, kick back, relax, shrug off that armor, set down that blade, roll your burdened shoulders and let down your guard. This is a place of life, a place of peace." That is an address made to Oryx, the Taken King, who I would remind everyone is not a disciple of the Witness despite his remarkable power. And you know how the Witness actually addresses one of its true disciples? Callus? It addresses Callus like this.
My witness. Progress.
One word. Progress. No pleasantries, no introductions, no frills, no verse, no song. It doesn't even say Callus's name or title. It gets straight to the point. This is the key difference. The Winnower, if it does exist, seems to be saying whole sentences where the Witness will say but one word. These two characters do not read as the same. They do not seem to be the same being whatsoever based on that alone. The Witness doesn't care for any of its disciples, it sees them as tools. But the Winnower was willing to converse with Oryx and give him a song and dance within this little entry, and it shows Oryx further visions and indwells within him an even deeper understanding of the brutality required of the sword logic. So again, that is a further point pulling the Witness and the Winnower apart as potential characters. But we can also look at this and see that this is a conversation recorded by Oryx. This happened. Oryx may have been deceived in some manner, but at very minimum, Oryx believes this to have occurred. and when Oryx communed with this great entity, he referred to it as the Deep itself. What's even more interesting about this is that when you look at the characters that the Witness has actually focused on within the Hive, you realize that Oryx was never truly the one it really focused on. The Witness focused its energies predominantly on Savathun. It was looking at her to ascend as a potential disciple, not the Taken King. And if you want proof of this, you have it in the throne world because Rulk's pyramid is still there. And why? Because Rulk was placed with his pyramid inside Savathun's throne world so that he might watch over Savathun, so that she would be trained and one day ascend to the rank of disciple. And what's more, take a look at the actual address given in the Books of Sorrow here in verse 4.2 and compare it to Unveiling, and I think you will understand that they are very similar. Unveiling is also filled with that same superfluous language, and it's got the same pronoun usage as in verse 4.2 of the Books of Sorrow. So again, we have that same pattern of speech from Unveiling, but also it appears in the Books of Sorrow, and then we have the fact that the Witness has predominantly focused its attention on Savathun instead of Oryx, even from her initial deception. This seems to imply that the Witness isn't necessarily the character that was talking to Oryx. Now, there is something else worth talking about here, and that's the control of the Taken themselves, as well as the power of taking that was learned by Oryx. To this day, there is very little that we know about the actual process here, but the one snippet of confirmed lore that we do actually get, as best I know, comes out of this moment in one of the Taken King Vidocs. Take a listen to this.
Oryx is here, and he's brought with him an evil army of corrupted Taken. Combatants that have been ripped out of our dimension and sent back with new powers and new abilities.
We know that Oryx learned the power to commune with the Deep from Akka, and that he inscribed it on the Tablets of Ruin. Those tablets were also coveted by Xivu Arath and Savathun because they contained the knowledge of the power to take. This is further expanded upon in the Witch Queen campaign, when we actually recover a Tablet of Ruin from the Temple of the Navigator, and have its power described to us by Savathun in the Altar of Reflection.
I will never be the Taken Queen. I refuse to play second fiddle to my brother Oryx. When Oryx carved the Tablets of Ruin, he described the ability to create the Taken. But Oryx's chisel was affected by viral power from the Deep. I studied its vermicular path. I read between the lines. The tablets hide a riddle. The answer to this riddle is something greater than the power to take. It is the power of the Witness to move worlds from one reality to another.
So at first, this actually sounds like it's a bit of a dead end, because it does sound here like, no, the power to take did come from the Witness instead. This power to take is the power to move world, and it's also a power that the Witness has. This also levels with what Marasov has said back in the Season of the Lost about Oryx on this matter, and in particular, Oryx's master.
I have already learned much by observation. The Taken pursued her here. Taken she once controlled. Taken that now serve a new master. Or, if Savathun is to be believed, their original master. Not her brother, Oryx, but something far older. She fears it.
So again, it does look as though suddenly this whole idea of Oryx being in communion with the Witness or the Winnower is thrown into doubt yet again, because supposedly the Witness is the original master of the Taken. But I think it needs to be stated quite keenly that master is not the same as creator. The Taken generally require some being with a very strong will to command them. That definitely applies to Oryx, that applies to Savathun in her own time, it applies to Rulk, and it absolutely applies to the Witness. But nowhere in any of these moments does it state that the Witness is actually the being that truly created the Taken. In fact, the previous clip from Savathun about the Tablets of Ruin states that the ability of the Tablets of Ruin that Oryx learned isn't the ability to take alone, It's the ability to move things between dimensions. That is the ability as stated, not corrupting them, but moving them. Oryx and the Witness both know this power. They are capable of taking something, which means they can take that thing and move it from one dimension to another. But the actual process of the corruption of turning something into a taken is not made clear. That is something which we do not see adequately. It is never explicitly stated that the Witness creates the taken, as best I know, and it is certainly never stated that Oryx explicitly created the taken. In fact, this distinction is doubled down on in the lore from back in Taken King, where the initial Grimoire card for the Taken as a group generally has Ikora describing them in these terms. The process is simple. An aperture opens like a jaw and swallows a living thing. It passes into another place. Later it returns. The Taken serve Oryx, but I think those jaws lead elsewhere. So again, whilst the associations and the surrounding lore are pretty messy, there is still a distinct possibility that there is something else waiting beyond our dimension in the place where things get sent when they are taken, when the worlds around them are moved. The Witness and Oryx may have been the master and king of the Taken respectively, but they might not be the thing that truly creates the Taken when they are drawn into that dimension and corrupted. This is a distinction that I've not necessarily accounted for, even up into my later lore videos about the Dread. Looking back on it now, I'm glad that it's just an introductory video because, I mean, there are clearly some things there that I need to call into question based on potential understandings that I now have. Assuming all this turns out to be correct, of course, which we don't know. There is something else worth mentioning, though. The Books of Sorrow commonly describe the Deep, which is analogous to the Darkness, and also refers to it as formless. This has been expanded upon later by the lore that we know about the Veil and the nature of darkness itself. Darkness is the unconscious realm of emotion, thought, memory, and will. It cannot be physical, and the Witness, much as it is a being of near godlike power which uses the darkness, is a combination of physical mortals at the end of the day. It is a physical being, it exists within the universe, it is not formless. But when Oryx summoned what it referred to as the Deep itself, it had to summon this entity into an unborn ogre, which Oryx prepared for its arrival. The formless thing was necessarily put into a vessel with physical form so that it might commune with the Taken King. The word formless isn't just used here in this description by the Hive, but it's also referred to in other parts of the Books of Sorrow, in particular the Leviathan of Fundament, which states that the Deep was formless and states that the war between the Deep and the Sky was a war between formless and form. And again, the Witness has a physical form, it doesn't need to manifest into things. But whatever spoke to Oryx, the Deep itself, had to be manifested and summoned into a physical construct for it to be successful at making contact with the Taken King. It was formless, unlike the Witness. So was that actually the Witness or something else beyond our dimension, perhaps? I don't know, but it certainly doesn't seem like it was the Witness. There are a few further similarities that we could discuss about this entry in the Books of Sorrow and the Unveiling Lore book generally, but they reach even further into the lore from other parts of Destiny's mythos, and that means we need to go exploring even further. Most importantly of all though, I think there is the repeated use of the single word majestic. It's mentioned in the Books of Sorrow where Oryx communicates with the Deep itself, which is presumptively the Winnower, but it's also repeated in Unveiling, where the entry literally called the Final Shape sees the Winnower describing the patterns emerging from the universe as it began and originally was as majestic. Note that these patterns emerged thanks to the sword logic, and that continuous assertion that the strong will survive over the weak. This is the rule that gives rise to the pattern, which is ultimately what's being called majestic by the Winnower. In the Books of Sorrow, the entity describes itself as majestic as well, near the end of that entry where it addresses Oryx. Where else can this term be found where it's of relevance, though? Well, again, I have to point to the good work of Venextran here, who put me on the path of the next bit to really find out about. The term majestic comes up in one other place of extreme relevance here, and I think that that is the Shadowkeep Collector's Edition lorebook. This is Venextran's finding. In particular, these lorebooks were actually the logs of the First Light installation and the K1 artifact installation written by Commander Huang Xuan. K1 itself, the artifact, the object at the center of the anomaly map, might be the key to all this. But what is K1? K1 is an artifact of darkness that was taken from deep within the moon. The scientists on the K1 project noted that this artifact, known as the Anomaly, was an object that predated the Traveler's arrival in Sol, and therefore predated the Witness's arrival in Sol. The object would eventually cause the scientists on the K1 project that were in proximity to it to break into bouts of insomnia and paranoia, and they would even begin to start worshipping it in a cult-like fashion. The entry prior to Majestic being brought up sees the commander deciding to meditate at an antenna created to allow the K1 team to commune with the anomaly. After they've done so, their next entries read as follows. Entry 22. It is lonely. It is impossibly, inexpressibly sad, beyond the capacity of the human limbic system to experience. But it is content in its loneliness, and in its beautiful sadness. It is the light of the first sunrise after your lover leaves forever. It is the acceptance before death. Transcendence lies not in the denial of attachments and limitations, but in the complete understanding of our confinement and the tautological tyranny of existence. The final stage of Buddhism cannot be attained. There is no escape from samsara, for it is as closed as a lock. Heaven is invaded, and its territories are afire, and all its mountains have been shattered into thrones. This is the inevitable and perfect shape of the truth. It is magnificent, majestic, majestic. Samsara is the belief in Buddhism that beings go through a continuous cycle of birth and rebirth until they achieve transcendence and enlightenment, allowing them to escape the cycle. When Commander Huang Xuan states that samsara is as closed as a lock, she is implying that the universe is a pattern that cannot be escaped. This also defies her own personal beliefs, given that she was a devout Buddhist. This pattern that the commander points out, though, it is just like the patterns in the flower game, it is just like the nature of the sword logic, and it is also a pattern that supposedly cannot be escaped. Note that the K1 artifact arrived in the system before the pyramid ship of Luna, which crashed during the collapse. This artifact predates the arrival of the Witness in Sol. So, who left it there? And what was causing the visions that would eventually lead to the commander reciting the same phrase noted in both Unveiling and the Books of Sorrow, which have no feasible connection to a random human outpost on the moon? There is an influence there, an entity that drives this connection, I am certain of it. And I think it is unlikely that it is the Witness, because again, the Witness and the Winnower are philosophically different, and the idea of samsara being as closed as a lock is about as clear as all of that gets. This pattern is far too similar to what we know of the Winnower to be that of the Witness in my mind. So we have the notes from Oryx in the Books of Sorrow, and we have the record of Commander Huang Xuan in the K1 project, and all of this links back to that similar phrase in Unveiling. But again, a question looms over Unveiling, which is, how true is it really? Well, I want to examine that a little closer for our next moment here, because I think there is a critical part of the mythos as stated of the Gardener and the Winnower, which is actually true. And that's the note about what happened in the garden before time. Again, a lot of credit here goes to Venextran. There is a moment within his video where I audibly gasped because he said that someone's mind was going to be blown, and I fully acknowledge that when I first watched it, yeah, that was me. I didn't know this. He taught me something which has been in front of my eyes for 5 years. This book also, again, It's unveiling. It comes from a slanted perspective that's trying to convince us of a philosophical idea, but let's focus on the events that it talks about for a second here, because I believe that at least one of these events can verifiably be traced to be true. So if we're looking for truth in this book, what question are we looking to focus on? Well, the question is this: was the garden real? And the answer to that appears to quite definitively be yes. And we know that thanks to an object that is mythical in nature, and yet which we have also touched, and reached out to, and forged an artifact from. The Tree of Silver Wings. This is an object that has been referenced countless times throughout the lore in the last 10 years. It was mentioned in Ruin Wings and the Mark 44 Stand-Asides, and even in Unveiling itself. In fact, you can find mentions of the tree in the Gardener and Winnower and T=0 entries. Just take a listen to some excerpts from those really quickly. And remember, this is Unveiling. This is directly from the Winnower if it does exist. The day was longer than all of time, and the night was swifter than a glint of light on a falling sugar crystal. Insects buzzed between the flowers, and worms slithered between the roots, feeding on what was and what might be. The first gradient in existence, the first dynamo of life. Rain fell from no sky, voices spoke without mouth or meaning. A tree of silver wings bloomed, yielded fruit, shed feathers, bloomed again. This was the time stated in Unveiling before the conflict that arose between the Gardener and the Winnower. After their conflict began, this is the noted fate of that Tree of Silver Wings. We wrestled in the garden, in the loom of possibilities where nothing existed and everything might. A shadowed agony among the flowers. We trampled the petals beneath our feet. We stomped the fruit to pulp, and we ground the seeds into the dust. In the wet pop of grapes and the smear of berries, in the perturbation of the fields that was the garden before the first tick of time and the first point of space, were the detonations that made the universes. Each universe was pregnant with its own inflationary volumes and braided with ever-ramifying timelines, each volume cooling and separating into domains of post-symmetric physics, all of which were incarnations of that great and all-dictating bipartite law that states only exist, lest you fail to exist. And still we fought. We brought down the Tree of Silver Wings and left the stump to smoke amid the meadows. We left prints of our splayed feet and our straining backs in the clay. So in the mythology of Unveiling, the Gardener and the Winnower fought and brought down the Tree of Silver Wings, leaving just a burning stump. But this isn't the only Tree of Silver Wings that we've seen in Destiny, because of course, we see another tree in the Season of Arrivals. This Tree of Silver Wings in the Season of Arrivals was planted by Osiris. Anyone remember this little cutscene here?
It's been a while, old man. The tower looks at you and sees a god. But I see a thug, a murderer, betrayer. You know why I left the Infinite Forest, what I saw. A line has been drawn in this system. Light on one side, dark on the other. Where do you stand?
So the aftermath of this conversation is actually shown off in a massive Bungie.net lore entry called What Gives Me Pause. It shows that Rasputin gave Osiris the location of an anomalous signal beyond the edge of the solar system. From this place, Osiris discovered the seed of silver wings that birthed the tree that we would discover on Io in the Season of Arrivals. Now really quickly, listen to this moment when he discovers it. A great maw yawns before them, wicked and soft, brilliant unfurling layers of opaque invitation. They drift, The deep comfort hums through his skin, breeding a resilient calm, a silent static stasis boiling away at the brim of consciousness. Collision alert, bow, course correction, negative, collision imminent. The anomalous maw welcomes. It is a gullet, endless in hunger and depth that splits reality like petals opening to consume the sun. The depth warps. Sweet flavors spin through the senses. It cradles him, locks in motionless descent, rocks away fear with warm recognition, stretches and wraps and cribs. Collision alert. Starboard, bow, A-beam, radial, aft, bow, A-beam, port, aft, radial, port, bow, course correction, negative, trajectory failure, collision, failure. It threads through space, set adrift beyond and before, until there is only within. Within a point, lone and stark amid the undulating expanse, distant at the edges and forward only deeper. Osiris, a wayfaring witness, a reluctant heir, a broken promise made true, a husk to fill a throne of sustenance, a shear to prune the vine, a warden to vacancy, a mind elated and crestfallen, a sojourner of meaning ever seeking. He turns back. Sagira's light blinks from shaded canopy within his vessel. Starless, bends, weave, and break through pools of luminescent memory. They flow to the point beyond. The point grows gaunt. And if he were to reach out, he would brush the walls with his fingertips. Osiris stands in dark, quiet comfort. He treads placid trim. He swims in depths lined by pale rivers of white gnashing far below and above. He sends forth his echoes. Their sight finds no purchase in the gullet. They push the walls beyond his fingers and let stand only the path of want. They drift until no longer felt. The skeins neither snap nor remain. Before him, the gnarled point softens and splits into a blooming cathedra, a metal seed laid barren in the bosom of the throne in a pool of light, a nexus. He plucks it from the pool. From its drippings spawn a rapturous light, spreading through the enormity and ravenously washing over the gullet at increasing pace. Dark gives way to cold reflective alloy, to logic and formless calculus. The cathedra, overwhelmed by prediction, rings with the dull mimicked tone of congruence. They scream to Osiris, his mind. They crave, never to tire, his unique causality. They would grow unceasing, death to death, forever. The path of wants falls to assimilation. Osiris flees to the safety of Sagira's blinking light. The gullet quivers reverberation that trails his every step in sentient chromic glisten. He calls for her to open the ship, to break the false light wave that besets his every step, to... I'm glad you changed your mind. Sagira's shell shines a reflection across the cockpit as Osiris's jump ship rolls to face the sun. Ready to go? Kuiper belt, slingshot, jump lock, trajectory clear, green line. Sagira. He grips a cold metal seed. Yes. The sun hangs dim and distant in a sea of ink. Its waning glare burns the focus out of Osiris's eyes. Blind to all other points they drift, engines humming in anticipation, vessel drenched in an angular shadow. This is a really nondescript passage, and I don't think I can even adequately sit there and state what is happening to Osiris based on the description. He finds some kind of anomaly out in deep space beyond the Kuiper belt, that's far beyond Pluto. The more that Osiris recovered the seed from, isn't well defined enough for us to actually say what it was. There is the chance that it's a pyramid ship given the acknowledgement of an angular shadow at the end, but there are no easy moments where we can describe something as an undulating gullet within one of these pyramid ships. Even the entrance that we entered during the end of the Shadowkeep campaign is more of an access port. It's not this great maw that then sends things dark and teething, quivering up this gullet to chase Osiris out. Do note that whilst Osiris found this seed in the anomalous maw, we don't exactly know how it got there, but we do know that the seed he found was planted on Io in the cradle where the Traveler once rested, and that it would turn into the second Tree of Silver Wings. Now again, really quickly, to go over some mythology, remember what was said before. The Gardener and the Winnower fought in the garden before time, and they brought down the original Tree of Silver Wings. Our original question is that garden real? And the Tree of Silver Wings is our proof. Yes, we have a seed from a Tree of Silver Wings, but Eris Morn states a really remarkable fact about that seed and its origins and parentage in particular from where it was harvested that give us the key to understanding everything about whether the garden was real or not. So, that passage can actually be found in the lore tab of the Seed of Silver Wings. That lore tab displays a conversation between Eris and a few other characters, and Eris makes a statement clear that changes everything. Take a listen. Now, Ikora, to the matter of your inquiry. Thank you for that, by the way. That you would not come yourself, I will say nothing. There is a second tree, obviously. It has grown, and from it the Guardian has taken a seed that we intend to use for study. With the tree's parent felled in the Black Garden, this may be a rarely given opportunity. The parent of the Tree of Silver Wings that we see here on Io was felled in the Black Garden, which would mean that the Black Garden is the garden before time, where the Winnower and the Gardener existed. But hold on a second. If this was truly the case, and if the Tree of Silver Wings was once in the garden, there'd need to be some proof of it left, right? Because, I mean, after all, when the Gardener and the Winnower fought, they brought down the Tree of Silver Wings and left its stump to burn within the meadows. Just its stump. That's all that was left. So, can we find the remains of the Tree of Silver Wings in the Black Garden? Can we find this stump? And as it happens, yes, we can. You've been looking at the location the whole time. That distant mesa, that foundation of rock at the center of the garden, that's where we go at the end of the Garden of Salvation raid. And when you've taken a moment to ascend, before you reach the final boss area, you can see these hills covered in radiolarian waterfalls. But hold on for just a second, because if you look to the left, to the edge of those hills, you see that they're not made of dirt or stone. That right there on the left-hand side is a root. And if you examine it closer, you'll notice the texture is not earth or dirt or stone. It's wood. Take a step back and look at the whole structure again, and you realize the truth. This is a stump. This is the remnants of a massive tree. This is the original Tree of Silver Wings, or what was left of it. Just like it was described in Unveiling, just like we have seen thanks to Eris. So we at very least know that the Unveiling is telling the truth about the destruction of the tree. It was here, the Black Garden. Now to be really clear, yes, this means that there was a tree here at one point, and yes, it means it was destroyed, and that does not necessarily mean that it was destroyed at the beginning of time, or destroyed by the Winnower and the Gardener. But it does do one hell of a job to corroborate some important facts. The Tree of Silver Wings has become one of our largest points of causality. Oh, and what do you know? There is a third Tree of Silver Wings in-game now. We see it in Root of Nightmares, and in particular, it happens because the Traveler, which is commonly associated with the Gardener, just happens to blast the Witness's pyramid ship with its own beam of light, its own core paracausal energy. So, what does that tell you? To me it says that yes, all of this is interconnected, and at very least, the Traveler is associated with something here. But the existence of that second tree doesn't necessarily mean that it was truly the gardener there. I mean, who knows, it could have just been another result of the Traveler's meddling. But that really brings us to another point in the lore, which is that the Traveler might not necessarily be just the Traveler. If we're to look at the existence of the Winnower, we also need to look at the existence of the Gardener. The Gardener is a topic that I've made a few videos on at this moment in time, especially ones that have involved the speaker and the communications from the light that other characters around the system have received generally. For the moment, I think it's simply important to note that if either the Winnower or the Gardener exist, then the other one likely does as well. I've already touched on this before, but there are a few moments in the lore where a figure of feminine nature, which could be analogous to the Gardener, appears to reach out and communicate with characters within the universe. There are a few more distressing instances that one can see within the universe, such as the moments where Clovis Bray saw visions of Alpha Lupi, but I think Saint 14 has probably got the most revealing instance of all. Much like every Exo, he dreams of what he thought the Deep Stone Crypt was, a tower that he had to reach by either peacefully walking through a field of golden millet or fighting an army composed of everyone he'd ever known. In one such dream that is noted in the Titan Legacy's Oath mark from the Deep Stone Crypt, Raid, Saint 14 is stopped from fighting as he staves off a horde of Vex. The Vex defeat him, but they're not alone. There's another figure there. She is what's relevant here. Saint 14, like most Exos, dreamt of the Deep Stone Crypt often. The golden field, the looming black tower, the battle below, surging with many faces that were eerily familiar. He was used to these dreams, like many of his mechanical kin, and resolutely uncurious about any deeper meaning. It couldn't be anything good, he reasoned long ago. Besides, his waking life kept him more than occupied. However, since his return from the kaleidoscope depths of the infinite forest, the dreams had increased in frequency and in eeriness. For the first few weeks, instead of battle, he faced single opponents in duels: Osiris, Marin, Zavala, Anna, even the Guardian who rescued him from the Vex. No matter whom he fought, he would use all his energy and light in the fight and lose every time. Flat on his back, he would look up at the tower and know that someone was watching from within. The night before Rasputin alerted everyone of pyramid ships entering the system, winter fell on his dreamscape, forcing him to charge through pillowy snowdrifts at a massive winged Vex unlike any he'd ever seen. He lost that night, as he would for many more nights, watching as an iridescent liquid, almost like Vex milk but different, contaminated, flowed from his every joint, sizzling in the snow. During the waking day, he maintained his usual exuberance, taking great satisfaction in helping Guardians hone their craft in the trials of Osiris. After all, the fights happening in reality were the ones to focus on. Why worry about what he can't control inside his head? Then, the night before a new vacuum of grief was opened in the system, a woman appeared at the threshold of the tower. Her clothes were black, her hair prematurely grey. She watched, arms crossed, as Saint hurled grenade after flaming grenade at the Vex with little effect. "You'll blind yourself with all that fire," she tutted. "Maybe then you'll finally learn to look instead of see." In one mighty swipe, the Vex cut the Exo down. The woman sighed as Saint crumpled to the ground. Silence fell, followed by the crunching of footsteps in the snow. "Just like your father," she said, kneeling by his head. "All of you." She laid a hand on the fore of his helm, as if feeling for a fever. "In your next life, you should take more after me." With that, her hand slid down to his eyes, and for the brief moment before he woke up, all was dark. This woman treated Saint almost like a mother treats a sickly child, reaching her hand to his forehead to feel almost as if for a fever. She also chastised him for being just like his father. The implication there is very clear. if this is the gardener reaching out in Saint's dreams, then in that moment she is talking contextually about the Winnower as his father. The implication there is really clear, that the way that Saint had been acting was the way of violence and that her way was not necessarily. Unveiling also reveals to us that the gardener would always be beaten by the Winnower because the gardener always stopped to offer peace, allowing the Winnower to strike again. We know from the discovery of clarity control in the Deepstone Crypt that exos were formed with the reductive power of darkness. The dark statue that presented itself on Europa was the source of clarity, and we also know that according to Clovis Bray's logbooks, the chronology of the statue leaves some interesting questions. Analysis of the ice indicates that it was placed there approximately 20 years before the K1 object was discovered, but the spectral analysis of the neutrino bursts implied that the statue was as old as the early universe. Either way, clarity certainly predates the arrival of the Witness in the system and the onset of the Black Fleet for the collapse. If the spectral analysis is correct and the statue has existed for as long as the early universe, then it almost certainly predates the Witness. And the term father here, as used by the figure in Saint's dream, is not only male just as the Winnower presents, but also, again, it is a singular pronoun, not a plural one, as we see used for the Witness. And again, let's look at the figure who's saying all of this one more time. Not only does she appear to be feminine in form, much as was the gardener described in Unveiling, but her garb and clothing, as Van Extern points out, potentially give us a little bit of a matching story to what's happened to the gardener since. The shroud that she is wearing is black, almost as though she's gone through a great degree of mourning, and her hair is prematurely grey, which Van Extern attributes to the idea that she has stressed and has lost the colour in her hair. And if this does fit with the gardener and the traveller, then, well, it makes sense considering what they've endured. She has watched countless civilizations fall and has watched her creations take after their father in the manner of choosing violence. And finally, I can't not point this out. Take a listen to this moment in the trailer for the final shape.
Take this power, Guardian. Be brave in dark places. For we are the light of hope.
This is not the first time I've asked this question. I've listened to that voice countless times, and I still have to ask, who is it? Because it isn't Ikora, it isn't Mara, it isn't Ido, it isn't Eris, it isn't Savathun. I don't know who the voice of this woman is. There are a few possibilities. I mean, for example, it could have been one of the rogue precursors known as RS, who survived the fall of the precursor civilization. But I think there is a far simpler answer. I think that this is encouraging us to take the transcendence, and that we are the light of hope, because this is the gardener, and it has found the end to its inevitable desire for a pattern that is not the sword logic. According to the Unveiling Lore, the gardener requested that a new law should be added into the flower game, a law that allowed for a greater degree of complexity in this game of flowers, and in doing so, they would allow a new shape other than the one that had continuously created itself to persist. I don't know about you, but I think that sounds a lot like the idea of transcendence itself, something built on complexity, something that exists within the game but also defies it to a certain extent, something which is not the same repeating pattern over and over. And if this voice is the voice of the gardener, we have to remember that she's looking for this possibility of us using transcendence and becoming something that escapes the pattern that the Winnower sets forth, because it would foil the Winnower's conception of the final shape. It is everything to do with survival, of course, but it is also an answer to that ultimate question by the Winnower, which is simply, is there anything that can exist without being part of that great final shape of its own? The sword logic, as the Hive would state it, or this majestic, majestic shape, as the Winnower would put it. It's been a long time now. We are well over an hour into this video, and before we bring it to a close, I do want to talk about one cautionary note, which is this. I've spoken about a lot of stuff here, and a lot of it contains some really tantalizing and conclusive ideas to do with the lore, And there's lots of points where I have discussed the idea of the Winnower as though it is an absolute. And I need you all to take a step back and acknowledge that we don't have enough proof of that. Because, ultimately, we don't know any of the answers to these questions. We have ideas of the answers. We have ideas of what might be the case, but we don't know truly what's going on. And I want everybody to remove all expectations of any story beats from their minds when it comes to the final shape. No, seriously, get rid of them. I know, we're all expecting to beat the Witness, and I know people are going to be expecting to see the Gardener and the Winnower and some end to this series of questions. This is a story that deserves a good ending, but I also think that the developers who have worked on this deserve the ability to tell their own story. Because here's the thing, right? They are currently sitting there and telling a story that has ultimately been the culmination of something created by many hands over the last 10 years. And to put it really bluntly, it's been incredibly messy. Tons of different writers, tons of different ideas, tons of vague notions, all pointing somewhere in the right direction, maybe. Ideas that might pan out, ideas that might not pan out, hot debates that might finally be answered, some which might perhaps not have an answer at all. Different positions that will be vying for supremacy, different compelling ideas with compelling evidence, different questions that all potentially will either be answered or not. And I want everyone to couch all of those, even after me having told you about them for the last hour and a bit. I think I need you to couch them because, again, the developers deserve the chance to tell their story. And if everyone is expecting the Winnower and the Gardener, if everyone is expecting this grand, sudden addition to Destiny and a series of answers about these big questions, that's perhaps reasonable. But I also think that the developers do deserve the chance to tell their own story. And yes, that may mean answering questions in a way that you didn't expect, which is why I'm asking you to remove any of your expectations. Sincerely, I do mean it, remove them. This is a massive thesis about the idea of the Gardener, the Winnower, whether the Winnower and the Witness are the same, the idea that they probably aren't, the idea that there may be some greater power tied to the Sword Logic's conception in Destiny, and all the little hints that we've seen over the many years that this is indeed the case. But it could all be disproven. The only thing I want from Final Shape is a story that is good. 10 years worth of lore is a hefty thing to try and manage. It leads to massive scaffoldings of expectations, some of which are very fair, and some of which are not. This is the conclusion to Destiny's first saga, so big payoffs have to happen. Big payoffs to important story threads and story questions are reasonable as far as expectations go, but stacking a specific lore theory into all of that, even one as important as this, I don't think that's reasonable. So I guess what I'm saying is a pair of things here. I really hope that Bungie can pull off the Final Shapes story, and I hope that we all go into it with some reasonable expectations, because ultimately, I believe that the Winnower's reveal would be a good thing for a cool story moment in the Final Shape, and I believe that it would add depth and complexity and dimension to the presence of other characters, from the Traveler to the Gardener to the Witness. There is a possibility for a great story that lays the foundations of the future for Destiny with these few individuals in mind. But I think there is also another real possibility, which is that there is a great story potentially in Final Shape even without any of these beings being mentioned, with all of Unveiling being just allegory and metaphor. Regardless, if the story is good, I'll be happy. That's all I want. I want people to be excited and delighted by what they see on screen, and I hope that the developers pull that off. I sincerely hope we hear more about everything to do with what the Precursors saw within the Veil's darkness, and what Winnower they perceived as being able to remodel the universe after what the Witness that they would create might want. I hope. But I'm not holding on to that hope because I don't think it's reasonable. So, I guess let Bungie tell their story, and let's hope that it's good. And let's hope that we can enjoy it, and talk about it, and theorize about it for years to come. The Final Shape is only a few weeks away. It's been a long 10-year journey in this first saga, And I know everybody sits there and says, it's over, it's over. It's not. I think we can all quite definitively say that now. I will still be here. I will still be making the same kind of content that I do. Even if we have another Lightfall situation, if I've learned anything from the past 12 months, it's that Destiny is unbelievably resilient, and that this is a universe with characters that I love. Also, I wish Bungie's devs would be treated properly. So let's do what the execs can't, and let's give them a fair break as they bring this first saga to a close. Anyway, that's all from me for now. It's been a long enough video. If you've enjoyed it and watched all the way through, go ahead and do the little thing. Just click and leave me a like for the sake of it. This is a long video and it takes ages to record these, and my throat is going to be scratchy like the string of a violin when this is done. So please, go ahead and do me a favor. Also, leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section, because I want to know what you think of this. Despite keeping expectations in line, do you think the Winnower is real or not? And for more Destiny content from the final shape and beyond, hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Horodacia ad Astra. I'll see you starside.